What if the most powerful civilization in Earth's history wasn't human at all? What if millions of years before the first human ever picked up a stone tool, before the first cave painting was etched into rock, before the first fire was lit in darkness, there existed architects and engineers whose creations dwarfed anything we've ever built? What if the rulers of the ancient world weren't primitive beasts struggling for survival, but intelligent beings with complex societies, advanced technologies, and monumental cities that have since crumbled to dust? It's not science fiction. This is a question that challenges everything we think we know about intelligence, civilization, and our place in the grand timeline of Earth. Because when you really examine the evidence, when you look past the assumptions we've carried for centuries, a startling possibility emerges. What if dinosaurs weren't just massive reptiles wandering through prehistoric forests? What if they were builders? For over 165 million years, dinosaurs dominated every continent on Earth. That's not just a long time, it's an almost incomprehensible span that dwarfs all of human existence. Modern humans have only been around for about 300,000 years. Our entire recorded history spans maybe 5,000 years. Industrial civilization, less than 300 years. But dinosaurs ruled this planet for 165 million years. That's over 500 times longer than humans have existed at all. During that vast expanse of time, these creatures evolved into thousands of different species. Some were massive, some were tiny, some flew through ancient skies, others swam in primordial oceans. And some, the evidence suggests, may have been far more intelligent than we ever imagined. Intelligence that had millions of years to develop, to grow, to create things we can barely comprehend. The story begins with a simple observation that paleontologists have been quietly discussing for decades. Dinosaur brains weren't all small. In fact, some species had brain-to-body ratios that rival modern birds, which are among the most intelligent animals alive today. Crows can solve complex puzzles. Parrots can learn languages. Ravens can plan for future events. These are dinosaurs, living dinosaurs whose ancestors survived the mass extinction 66 million years ago. But what about the dinosaurs that didn't survive? What about the species that had even larger brains, more complex social structures, more time to develop their intelligence? What about the ones that lived not for thousands of years, but for millions upon millions of years in stable environments that allowed their minds to grow and their societies to flourish? Consider Troodon, a dinosaur that lived in the late Cretaceous period. It was small, about the size of a person, but its brain was proportionally huge. Some scientists have estimated that if Troodon had survived the extinction event and continued evolving, it might have developed intelligence comparable to humans in just a few million more years. But Troodon already had 75 million years of evolution behind it. What if some members of its lineage had already crossed that threshold? What if they had already become builders? The more you dig into the fossil record, the more strange patterns emerge. Patterns that make you wonder if we've been looking at the evidence all wrong. Dinosaur trackways that seem too organized, too purposeful. Bone beds that appear arranged rather than scattered. Geological formations that look almost architectural in their precision. And then there are the mysteries that paleontology can't quite explain. Why do we find dinosaur fossils in formations that suggest they lived in highly organized social groups? Why do some species show evidence of complex communication systems, elaborate courtship rituals, and sophisticated nesting behaviors that required planning and coordination? Why do certain dinosaur species appear to have engaged in activities that look suspiciously like agriculture, deliberately managing plant growth in ways that benefited their communities. These aren't random observations. They're pieces of a puzzle that starts to form a picture when you step back and look at the bigger questions. Questions about intelligence, about civilization, about what it means to build and create and leave a mark on the world. But here's where it gets really interesting. If dinosaurs were intelligent builders, if they created cities and technologies and complex societies, where is all the evidence? Where are their ruins? Where are their tools? Where are the unmistakable signs of their civilization? The answer to that question lies in understanding something most people never think about. Time. Deep time. The kind of time that doesn't just erase buildings and artifacts, but transforms entire continents. The kind of time that turns mountains into dust and ocean floors into mountaintops. The kind of time that makes even the most permanent human structures look like sandcastles waiting for the tide. Human civilization is incredibly young. If the entire history of Earth were compressed into a single year, human civilization would appear in the last few seconds before midnight on December 31st. Our oldest cities are maybe 10,000 years old. Our oldest surviving structures are a few thousand years old at most. And even these ancient monuments are already crumbling, already being reclaimed by nature. Now imagine trying to preserve something not for thousands of years, but for 66 million years. That's how long it's been since the dinosaurs went extinct. In that span of time, entire mountain ranges have risen and fallen. Continents have drifted thousands of miles. Ocean basins have opened and closed. The very surface of the Earth has been completely transformed multiple times over. If humans disappeared tomorrow, what would remain of our civilization after 66 million years? Our cities would crumble within centuries. Our roads would be overgrown and eroded within millennia. Our plastics and metals would break down, corrode, and scatter. Our digital records would be lost as soon as the power grids failed. Within 1 million years, almost nothing recognizable would remain. Within 66 million years, even our most ambitious monuments would be ground to dust by the relentless forces of geology. So, if dinosaur civilizations once existed, if they built cities and created technologies, we wouldn't expect to find intact buildings or perfectly preserved artifacts. We'd expect to find something much more subtle, traces, hints, anomalies in the geological record that suggest something unusual happened, something that natural processes alone can't explain. And when you start looking for those traces, when you examine the rock layers from the age of dinosaurs with fresh eyes, strange patterns begin to emerge. Unusual mineral concentrations, unexpected chemical signatures, structures that seem too organized, too symmetrical, too purposeful to be entirely natural. Take the Morrison Formation, a rock unit that spans across the western United States and contains some of the most famous dinosaur fossils ever discovered. Within these rocks, geologists have found layers that seem almost engineered. Precisely arranged stone formations that look like they could be the foundations of ancient structures. Mineral deposits that appear to have been deliberately concentrated and shaped. Patterns of erosion that suggest water was once channeled and controlled in ways that don't match natural river systems. Most geologists dismiss these features as coincidental, the result of unusual but natural processes. And they're probably right, most of the time. But what if some of these anomalies aren't natural at all? What if they're the weathered, eroded, barely recognizable remains of something that was once built with intention and purpose? The evidence isn't conclusive. It can't be. After 66 million years, conclusive evidence of almost anything would be miraculous. But it's suggestive. It raises questions. It makes you wonder if the world of the dinosaurs was more complex, more organized, more intentionally shaped than we've ever imagined. And then there's the intelligence question itself. We know that some dinosaurs had large brains. We know they engaged in complex behaviors. We know they lived in social groups and communicated with each other in sophisticated ways. But intelligence isn't just about brain size or social behavior. Intelligence is about problem solving, tool use, environmental manipulation, and the ability to pass knowledge from one generation to the next. Modern birds, the direct descendants of dinosaurs, demonstrate all of these abilities. Crows make tools. Parrots solve puzzles that challenge human children. Some birds engage in what can only be called agriculture, deliberately planting and tending to food sources. Others build structures so complex and beautiful, they seem almost architectural in their design. If modern birds, with their relatively small brains and short lifespans, can achieve these levels of intelligence and creativity, what might their ancestors have accomplished, given millions of years to develop and refine their abilities? What might they have built during those long ages when the climate was warm, the continents were lush with vegetation, and vast stretches of time allowed for the gradual accumulation of knowledge and skill? The more you think about it, the more remarkable it becomes that we assume dinosaurs were simple, primitive creatures. We picture them as lumbering giants, driven only by basic instincts for food, reproduction, and survival. But this image comes largely from early paleontology, from a time when we understood very little about animal intelligence, social behavior, or the complexity of prehistoric ecosystems. Modern paleontology paints a very different picture. Dinosaurs were active, social, intelligent animals with complex behaviors and sophisticated adaptations. Some species show evidence of parental care that extended for years. Others engaged in elaborate courtship displays that required careful choreography and timing. Many lived in herds with complex social hierarchies and communication systems. But even this updated view of dinosaurs may be too limited, because it still assumes that intelligence and civilization must look like human and human intelligence civilization. It assumes that building and creating must involve the same materials, the same techniques, the same purposes that drive human construction. What if dinosaur builders worked with entirely different materials? What if they shaped their environments in ways we don't recognize as construction? What if their technologies were biological rather than mechanical, grown rather than assembled, living rather than manufactured? This isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Even today, we're beginning to develop biological technologies. We're learning to engineer organisms, to grow materials, to create living systems that can self-repair and adapt. We're discovering that the boundary between the built and the grown, between the artificial and the natural, is far more fluid than we once believed. If human civilization is already moving in this direction, after just a few centuries of industrial development, what might a civilization with millions of years of experience have achieved? What if dinosaur builders learned to work with life itself, creating technologies so seamlessly integrated with natural processes that we can't distinguish them from the background of biology and geology? The implications of this possibility are staggering. It means that intelligence and civilization might be far more common in Earth's history than we've ever suspected. It means that the rise of consciousness creativity, and culture might not be a unique human achievement, but a recurring theme in the story of life on this planet. It also means that we might not be the first technological species Earth has produced. We might be part of a much longer tradition of intelligence and building, a tradition that stretches back through deep time to the age of dinosaurs and perhaps even beyond. But if this is true, if intelligent dinosaurs once built civilizations that spanned continents and endured for millions of years, then what happened to them? Why did they disappear? And what does their story tell us about the future of intelligence on Earth? The answer to those questions lies in understanding something that challenges our deepest assumptions about survival and success. We tend to think that intelligence guarantees longevity, that consciousness provides an evolutionary advantage so powerful it becomes unstoppable. But what if the opposite is true? What if intelligence, especially the kind that builds and reshapes entire worlds, carries within it the seeds of its own destruction? Consider the timeline. Dinosaurs ruled Earth for 165 million years. But that reign didn't end gradually. It ended suddenly, catastrophically, in what paleontologists call the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction event. 66 million years ago, an asteroid roughly 6 miles wide slammed into what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula with the force of billions of nuclear weapons. The impact threw so much debris into the atmosphere that sunlight was blocked for months, maybe years. Global temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis stopped, the food chain collapsed from the bottom up. But here's what's fascinating about that extinction event. It wasn't random in terms of what survived and what didn't. The largest dinosaurs died out completely. The most specialized species vanished. But some of the smaller, more adaptable dinosaurs survived and eventually evolved into modern birds. The pattern suggests that survival wasn't about strength or size, or even intelligence. It was about flexibility, about the ability to adapt quickly to rapidly changing conditions. Now imagine that some dinosaurs had indeed developed advanced civilizations. Imagine they had cities, technologies, complex social structures that had been refined over millions of years. All of that complexity, all of that specialization, would have made them incredibly vulnerable to sudden environmental change. Their cities would have required constant food supplies that depended on stable ecosystems. Their technologies would have been optimized for specific environmental conditions. Their social structures would have been built around assumptions about how the world worked. When the asteroid hit, when the skies darkened and the world turned cold, those very achievements would have become liabilities. The more complex the civilization, the more catastrophic its collapse would have been. The survivors would have been the simple, adaptable creatures that could eat almost anything and live almost anywhere. The builders, the architects, the engineers of the dinosaur world would have been among the first to disappear. This pattern isn't unique to the extinction of the dinosaurs. Throughout Earth's history, mass extinction events have repeatedly reset the trajectory of life on this planet. The end Permian extinction, 252 million years ago, wiped out over 90% of all species. The late Ordovician extinction eliminated countless marine organisms. Each time, complexity gave way to simplicity, specialization gave way to adaptability, and whatever civilizations might have existed were swept away like sandcastles in a tsunami. But here's where the story gets even more intriguing. What if some dinosaur builders saw it coming? What if their intelligence allowed them to recognize the signs of impending catastrophe and attempt to preserve something of their civilization for the future? This isn't pure speculation. We know that some dinosaurs engaged in complex behaviors that suggest long-term planning. We know they could predict seasonal changes, plan migration routes, and coordinate group activities across vast distances. If some species had developed truly advanced intelligence, they might have been capable of even more sophisticated foresight. Perhaps they tried to build shelters deep underground, in caves and caverns that might survive the impact. Perhaps they attempted to preserve their knowledge in some form that could outlast the catastrophe. Perhaps they even tried to ensure that their descendants, or their evolutionary cousins, would have the tools and information needed to rebuild when the world finally stabilized. The evidence for such preservation efforts would be incredibly difficult to detect after 66 million years. Underground structures would have been crushed by geological forces or filled with sediment. Information storage systems based on organic materials would have long since decayed. Even structures built from the most durable materials would have been transformed beyond recognition by the slow but relentless processes of erosion, weathering, and tectonic movement. But there might be traces. Subtle anomalies in the geological record that suggest something unusual was happening in the final years before the extinction. Concentrations of materials that seem too organized to be natural. Patterns of fossilization that hint at deliberate burial or preservation. Chemical signatures that suggest large-scale industrial activity in the late Cretaceous period. Some researchers have found exactly these kinds of anomalies. Layers of sediment from just before the extinction that contain unusual concentrations of rare earth elements. Fossil assemblages that seem too carefully arranged to be the result of natural processes. Geological formations that appear to have been modified or engineered in ways that don't match known natural phenomena. Most scientists interpret these findings conservatively, looking for natural explanations that don't require assumptions about dinosaur intelligence or technology, and that's probably the right approach most of the time. Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence, and the evidence we have is suggestive rather than definitive. But what if we're being too conservative? What if our assumptions about what's possible are limiting our ability to see what's actually there? What if the traces of dinosaur civilization are hiding in plain sight, dismissed as natural anomalies because we can't imagine that such a thing could have existed? The question becomes even more complex when you consider the possibility that dinosaur building might have looked nothing like human building. We construct with metal and concrete and glass, materials that seem permanent but actually break down relatively quickly on geological timescales. What if dinosaur builders worked with living materials that were designed to integrate seamlessly with natural ecosystems? Modern biomimicry gives us hints of what such technologies might have looked like. We're learning to grow buildings from fungi, to create self-repairing materials using bacterial processes, to design structures that adapt and evolve in response to environmental changes. These biological technologies leave very different traces than traditional construction. They blur the line between the artificial and the natural in ways that might make them almost invisible to future archaeologists. If dinosaur civilizations developed along these lines, if they learned to work with life rather than against it, their cities might have looked more like forests than urban centers. Their technologies might have been indistinguishable from evolved biological systems. Their infrastructure might have been grown rather than built, living systems that could adapt, repair themselves, and even reproduce. Such a civilization would leave traces very different from the ones we're trained to recognize. Instead of ruins, we might find unusual patterns of plant growth fossilized in ancient rock layers. Instead of artifacts, we might find biological structures that seem too complex or too purposeful to be entirely natural. Instead of clear evidence of intelligence, we might find subtle signatures of biological engineering that could easily be mistaken for natural evolution. This possibility raises profound questions about how we define civilization itself. Is a city still a city if it's grown from living organisms rather than built from dead materials? Is technology still technology if it's biological rather than mechanical? Is intelligence still intelligence if it expresses itself through biological manipulation rather than tool use? These aren't just philosophical questions. They have practical implications for how we search for evidence of past intelligence and how we think about the development of intelligence in the future. If we limit our definition of civilization to human-like technologies and human-like structures, we might miss entirely different approaches to building and creating that could be far more sophisticated than our own. The story of potential dinosaur builders also forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of progress and the meaning of advancement. We tend to think of technological development as linear, as a steady march toward greater complexity and capability. But what if that's not how it works? What if intelligence and civilization follow cyclical patterns, rising and falling in response to environmental pressures and cosmic events? What if the Earth has hosted multiple technological civilizations over its long history, each one developing along different lines, each one eventually succumbing to catastrophic change, each one leaving behind only the faintest traces of its former glory? What if human civilization is just the latest experiment in consciousness and creativity, destined to follow the same pattern of rise and eventual fall? This perspective doesn't diminish human achievement, but it does place it in a much larger context. It suggests that intelligence and civilization might be natural phenomena, recurring features of planetary evolution that emerge whenever conditions are right. It implies that consciousness isn't a unique human trait, but a fundamental property of complex systems, something that arises spontaneously when matter and energy organize themselves in sufficiently sophisticated ways. If this is true, then the story of dinosaur builders isn't just about the past. It's about the future as well. It's about understanding the patterns that govern the rise and fall of intelligent species. It's about learning from the successes and failures of previous civilizations so that we might have a better chance of avoiding their fate. But perhaps most importantly, the story of dinosaur builders challenges us to expand our definition of what intelligence can look like and what civilizations can achieve. Because if we're right, if some dinosaurs did develop sophisticated societies and technologies during their 165 million year reign, then their approach to civilization might offer insights that could transform our own future. Think about the fundamental differences between how humans build and how dinosaurs might have built. Human civilization is based on extraction and transformation. We dig metals from the ground, cut down forests, burn fossil fuels, and reshape raw materials into the products we need. This approach has given us incredible power in a very short time, but it's also created massive environmental disruption and resource depletion that threatens our long-term survival. Dinosaur builders, with millions of years to refine their techniques, might have discovered entirely different approaches. They might have learned to work with natural processes rather than against them, to enhance and direct biological systems rather than replace them with artificial ones. Their cities might have been living ecosystems. Their technologies might have been evolved organisms. Their infrastructure might have been indistinguishable from the natural world itself. Such an approach would explain why we find so little direct evidence of their civilization. A technology based on biological manipulation and ecosystem management wouldn't leave behind the kind of dramatic ruins we associate with advanced societies. Instead, it would create subtle modifications to natural systems, changes that might persist in the genetic code of surviving species or in the structure of ancient ecosystems. And there are hints of such modifications if you know where to look. Certain plant species that appear in the fossil record during the age of dinosaurs show characteristics that seem almost too convenient, too perfectly adapted to specific dinosaur needs. Flowering plants that evolved to produce fruits perfectly sized for certain dinosaur species. Trees that developed hollow chambers that could serve as nesting sites. Grasslands that appeared just as large, herbivorous dinosaurs were diversifying and spreading across the continents. Conventional paleobotany explains these developments as coevolution, the natural process by which species adapt to each other over long periods of time. And that's probably correct for most cases. But what if some of these apparently natural developments were actually guided, the result of intelligent intervention by dinosaur agriculturalists who learned to shape plant evolution to serve their needs? The techniques for such biological manipulation might not have been as different from modern genetic engineering as we might think. Even today, we're discovering that many organisms naturally engage in horizontal gene transfer, sharing genetic material across species boundaries in ways that can rapidly alter entire ecosystems. Bacteria routinely exchange genes that give them new capabilities. Viruses carry genetic information between different host species. Even complex organisms like plants can incorporate genetic material from other species under certain conditions. If dinosaur builders learned to harness and direct these natural processes, they could have developed a form of biotechnology that was far more sophisticated than our own mechanical technologies, yet left very different traces in the fossil record. Instead of factories, they might have created specialized organisms that produced the materials they needed. Instead of vehicles, they might have bred creatures that could transport them across vast distances. Instead of computers, they might have developed biological information processing systems based on networked colonies of specialized organisms. The implications of such biotechnology would be staggering. A civilization that could manipulate life at the genetic level could potentially solve problems that continue to challenge human society. They could create organisms that naturally broke down waste products, eliminating pollution. They could develop biological systems that harvested solar energy more efficiently than any plant, providing abundant clean power. They could engineer organisms that extracted specific minerals from seawater or soil, providing all the raw materials needed for further development. Most remarkably, such a civilization might have achieved something that continues to elude human technology: true sustainability. Because biological systems naturally recycle their components, a biotechnology-based civilization wouldn't face the resource depletion and waste accumulation problems that threaten modern industrial society. Their entire technological infrastructure could be self-maintaining, self-repairing, and self-reproducing, requiring no external inputs beyond sunlight and basic chemical elements. This vision of dinosaur civilization might explain one of the most puzzling aspects of their 165 million year reign: its stability. Human civilization has existed for only a few thousand years, and it's already showing signs of environmental stress and resource exhaustion. How could any technological civilization survive for millions of years without completely disrupting the planetary systems it depended on? The answer might be that dinosaur builders learned something we haven't: how to create technology that enhanced rather than degraded the natural world. Their cities might have increased biodiversity rather than destroying it. Their industries might have cleaned the environment rather than polluting it. Their transportation systems might have strengthened ecosystems rather than fragmenting them. But if such a sustainable civilization was possible, if dinosaur builders really did achieve this kind of harmony between technology and nature, then why did it end? Why didn't their biological technologies help them survive the catastrophic asteroid impact that ended the age of dinosaurs? The answer might lie in the very nature of biological systems. Living technologies, no matter how sophisticated, are still subject to the fundamental limitations of life itself. They require specific environmental conditions to function. They depend on complex food webs and nutrient cycles. They're vulnerable to diseases, genetic drift, and environmental changes that exceed their adaptive capacity. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, it didn't just kill individual organisms. It collapsed entire ecosystems, disrupted global climate patterns, and altered the basic chemistry of the atmosphere and oceans. No biological technology, no matter how advanced, could have survived such a complete transformation of planetary conditions. The dinosaur builders might have seen it coming. Their sophisticated understanding of biological systems might have given them insights into planetary-scale processes that warned them of impending catastrophe. They might have detected changes in cosmic radiation, unusual patterns in plant behavior, or subtle shifts in animal migration routes that indicated something unprecedented was approaching. But even foreknowledge might not have been enough. The scale of the impact was simply too vast, the changes too rapid and complete for any Earth-based civilization to survive. The dinosaur builders, for all their achievements, were still bound by the physical limitations of their home planet. They couldn't escape to space, couldn't shield themselves from global environmental collapse, couldn't maintain their biological technologies without the complex ecosystems those technologies depended on. Yet their story might not have ended with the extinction. Because biological systems have one advantage over mechanical technologies: they can evolve. Even as the great dinosaur civilizations collapsed, their biological technologies might have continued to adapt, to survive, to find new forms in the radically changed post-impact world. Some of the organisms they created might have persisted as wild species, their artificial origins gradually obscured by millions of years of natural evolution. Others might have gone extinct but left genetic traces that influenced the development of later species. Still others might have survived in modified form, their original functions lost, but their basic biological innovations preserved in the genetic code of their descendants. If this is true, then traces of dinosaur biotechnology might still exist today, hidden in the genomes of modern organisms. The unusual efficiency of photosynthesis in certain plants, the remarkable navigation abilities of migratory animals, the complex social behaviors of insects, the sophisticated immune systems that protect us from disease. All of these might be, in part, the legacy of biological engineering that began over 100 million years ago. This possibility suggests a profound connection between the age of dinosaurs and the modern world. We might not be starting from scratch in our attempts to develop biological technologies. We might be rediscovering principles and techniques that were first developed by minds that thought in ways we can barely imagine, approaches that took, using millions of years to perfect. The implications extend beyond technology to questions of consciousness and intelligence itself. If dinosaur builders really did exist, if they developed forms of awareness and creativity that persisted for geological ages, then consciousness might be far more common and durable than we've assumed. Intelligence might not be a rare accident, but a fundamental property of complex systems, something that emerges naturally whenever conditions allow and persists in various forms, even through catastrophic changes. This perspective transforms how we think about our own place in the cosmic story. We're not the first intelligent species to emerge on Earth, and we probably won't be the last. We're part of a much longer tradition of consciousness and creativity, inheritors of a legacy that stretches back through deep time to the age of giant reptiles and biological cities. But we're also facing the same fundamental challenge that confronted our possible predecessors. How do you build a civilization that can survive not just for centuries or millennia, but for millions of years? How do you create technologies that enhance rather than degrade the planetary systems they depend on? How do you develop forms of intelligence and culture that can adapt to catastrophic change while preserving their essential insights and achievements? They might have found solutions we haven't even begun to imagine. Their biological technologies might offer blueprints for sustainable development that could help human civilization avoid the resource depletion and environmental collapse that threaten our future. Their approaches to consciousness and social organization might provide insights into forms of intelligence that are more durable and adaptable than our own. But perhaps most importantly, their story reminds us that intelligence and civilization are not human inventions. They're natural phenomena, expressions of the universe's tendency toward greater complexity and self-awareness. We're not separate from nature, creating artificial systems that oppose natural processes. We're part of nature, participating in cosmic evolution, carrying forward a tradition of consciousness and creativity that may be as old as complex life itself. The evidence for dinosaur builders remains suggestive rather than conclusive. The traces we're looking for would be incredibly subtle after 66 million years of geological change. But the possibility itself is transformative, forcing us to expand our conception of what intelligence can achieve and how civilizations can develop. Whether or not dinosaurs were actually builders, the questions their story raises are crucial for understanding our own future. How do we create technologies that work with natural systems rather than against them? How do we develop forms of consciousness that can adapt to rapid change while preserving essential wisdom? How do we build a civilization that could survive not just for generations, but for geological ages? These are the challenges that will define the next phase of human development. And in meeting them, we might be following pathways first explored by minds that ruled the earth, when our own ancestors were tiny mammals hiding in the shadows of a very different world. The search for evidence of dinosaur builders requires us to think differently about what constitutes proof of intelligence. When we look for signs of human civilization, we search for obvious markers: stone tools, pottery fragments, building foundations, metal objects. These artifacts tell clear stories about human capabilities and intentions. But dinosaur intelligence, if it existed, might have expressed itself in ways so foreign to human experience that we wouldn't recognize the evidence even if we found it. Consider how modern science is beginning to understand intelligence in the natural world. Dolphins use signature whistles that function like names. Elephants have been observed performing what can only be described as funeral rituals. Octopuses not only use tools, but carry them from place to place, planning for future use. Bees communicate complex spatial information through intricate dances. None of these behaviors leave the kind of archaeological evidence we associate with human intelligence, yet they represent sophisticated cognitive abilities that we're only beginning to appreciate. Now imagine intelligence that had not thousands or millions of years to develop, but hundreds of millions. Intelligence that evolved in environments completely different from those that shaped human cognition. Intelligence that might have solved the fundamental challenges of survival, cooperation, and environmental manipulation in ways that bear no resemblance to human solutions. Such intelligence might have built with materials we don't consider building materials at all. Instead of shaping stone or metal, dinosaur builders might have shaped living systems themselves. They could have engineered entire ecosystems, creating biological machines that served their purposes while remaining indistinguishable from natural processes. Their construction projects might have been indistinguishable from evolution itself. This possibility becomes more plausible when you examine the fossil record with fresh eyes. The Mesozoic era, the age of dinosaurs, saw an explosion of biological innovation that hasn't been matched before or since. Flowering plants appeared and diversified with unprecedented speed. Insect societies reached levels of complexity that still amaze modern biologists. Marine ecosystems developed intricate relationships between species that seem almost too perfect to be coincidental. Traditional paleontology explains these developments as natural evolution, responding to changing environmental conditions. But what if some of these innovations weren't entirely natural? What if they represented the handiwork of intelligence working on a scale and timeline that dwarfs human engineering projects? The evidence would be subtle, embedded in the very structure of ancient ecosystems. We might find it in the unusually rapid diversification of certain plant groups that happen to produce fruits perfectly sized for specific dinosaur species. We might detect it in the evolution of flowering plants that developed chemical compounds with no apparent survival benefit for the plants themselves, but which might have served purposes we can't yet understand. We might recognize it in the sudden appearance of insect behaviors that seem too sophisticated for their apparent evolutionary stage. Some researchers have begun to notice exactly these kinds of patterns. The coevolution of flowering plants and dinosaurs happened remarkably quickly by evolutionary standards. Certain chemical compounds that appear in Mesozoic plant fossils seem unnecessarily complex for simple survival needs. Some dinosaur nesting sites show evidence of sophisticated environmental management that goes far beyond what we see in modern animals. These observations don't prove dinosaur intelligence, but they raise intriguing questions. They suggest that the biological world of the Mesozoic might have been shaped by forces more complex and purposeful than random. They hint at evolutionary pressure, the possibility that intelligence was already at work, guiding and directing natural processes in ways that enhance the survival and prosperity of entire ecosystems. But if dinosaur builders really did exist, if they developed biotechnologies that could manipulate evolution itself, then their greatest achievement might have been something we haven't considered. They might have learned to preserve their intelligence and knowledge in forms that could survive even catastrophic extinction events. They might have embedded their understanding of the world in the very genetic code of the organisms they worked with. This concept isn't as far-fetched as it might sound. Modern biology has discovered that organisms routinely store environmental information in their DNA. Epigenetic changes allow parents to pass environmental adaptations to their offspring without waiting for genetic mutations. Some species can even pass learned behaviors to future generations through modifications to gene expression patterns. If dinosaur builders understood these mechanisms, If they learned to encode information directly into the genomes of the species they worked with, then their knowledge might still exist today. Hidden in the DNA of modern organisms, waiting to be decoded by scientists who understand what they're looking for. The sophisticated behaviors we observe in modern animals, the complex chemical processes that drive photosynthesis, the intricate social structures of insect colonies, all of these might contain fragments of ancient knowledge encoded by minds that understood biology in ways we're only beginning to imagine. This possibility transforms our understanding of extinction and survival. The end of the dinosaurs might not have been the end of their civilization. It might have been a transformation, a translation of their achievements from one form to another. Their cities might have died, their bodies might have fossilized, but their most important discoveries might have survived in the living code of their biological technologies. If this is true, then the development of modern biotechnology represents something more than human innovation. It might represent the rediscovery of principles first explored by dinosaur minds millions of years ago. Our attempts to engineer organisms, to manipulate genetics, to create biological solutions to technological problems might be following pathways first mapped by intelligences that thought in biological rather than mechanical terms. The implications extend beyond technology to questions of consciousness and communication. If dinosaur builders encoded information in biological systems, they might have developed forms of knowledge transmission that operated on timescales completely foreign to human experience. Instead of writing books or building monuments, they might have created living libraries, organisms that carried cultural information in their genetic structure and passed it down through reproduction and evolution. Such information storage systems would be incredibly robust. Unlike human records, which degrade over time and require constant maintenance, biological information systems are self-repairing and self-reproducing. They could preserve knowledge for millions of years while adapting to changing conditions. They could survive catastrophic events that would destroy any human library or database. But they would also be incredibly difficult to recognize. The information might be distributed across multiple species, encoded in patterns that wouldn't be apparent without sophisticated analysis. It might be embedded in seemingly random genetic sequences that actually contain structured data. It might be expressed through behaviors that appear natural but actually represent cultural traditions maintained across geological time. This vision of dinosaur civilization suggests that intelligence might be far more persistent and adaptable than we've assumed. We think of consciousness as fragile, dependent on specific physical structures that can be easily destroyed. But what if intelligence can exist in many different forms, moving between biological and mechanical systems, persisting through catastrophic changes by adapting to new conditions and new possibilities? The search for evidence of such adaptive intelligence requires new approaches and new technologies. Instead of looking for ruins and artifacts, we need to search for patterns in biological systems that suggest purposeful design. Instead of excavating ancient sites, we need to analyze the genomes of modern organisms for traces of ancient engineering. Instead of studying individual fossils, we need to examine entire ecosystems for signs of intelligent management. Some of this work has already begun. Researchers are using computer algorithms to search for unusual patterns in genetic data. They're analyzing the chemical composition of ancient plant fossils for signs of artificial compounds. They're studying the coevolution of species for evidence of guided, rather than random development. The results so far are intriguing but not conclusive. There are patterns that don't quite fit standard evolutionary models. There are chemical signatures that seem too complex for natural processes. There are behavioral traits that appear in the fossil record earlier than conventional theory would predict. None of this constitutes proof of dinosaur intelligence, but it suggests that the biological world of the Mesozoic was more complex and sophisticated than we've assumed. It hints at the possibility that intelligence was already at work, shaping and directing natural processes in ways that enhance the survival and development of entire ecosystems. But perhaps the most compelling evidence for dinosaur builders comes not from what we find in the rocks, but from what we observe in the modern world. The remarkable intelligence of birds, the direct descendants of dinosaurs, suggests that advanced cognition has deep roots in the dinosaur lineage. The sophisticated behaviors we see in modern birds, their tool use, their problem-solving abilities, their complex social structures, all point to cognitive capabilities that might have been even more advanced in their larger-brained ancestors. If modern birds, with their relatively small brains and short lifespans, can demonstrate such intelligence, what might their ancestors have achieved given millions of years to develop their cognitive abilities? What technologies might they have created using biological systems as their building materials? What forms of consciousness might they have developed that bear no resemblance to human awareness? These questions push us beyond the boundaries of conventional paleontology into realms where science and speculation intersect. They force us to expand our definitions of intelligence, technology, and civilization itself. They challenge us to imagine forms of consciousness and creativity that might be completely alien to human experience, yet perfectly adapted to their own environmental and evolutionary contexts. The story of potential dinosaur builders also raises profound questions about the nature of progress and development. We tend to think of technological advancement as a linear process, with each generation building on the achievements of the previous one. But what if development is cyclical, with periods of advancement followed by collapse and renewal? What if intelligence emerges, flourishes, and disappears in cycles that span millions of years? Such a perspective would place human civilization in a much larger context. Instead of being the first intelligent species to emerge on Earth, we might be part of a recurring pattern, the latest experiment in consciousness and creativity. Our achievements, remarkable as they seem to us, might be variations on themes first explored by minds that existed when the continents were arranged differently, and the climate was unlike anything in human experience. This cyclical view of intelligence and civilization doesn't diminish human achievement, but it does suggest that we might learn from the successes and failures of previous experiments in consciousness. If dinosaur builders really did exist, if they developed sustainable biotechnologies and forms of social organization that persisted for millions of years, then their approaches might offer insights that could help human civilization avoid the pitfalls that have destroyed previous attempts at planetary-scale intelligence. But it also suggests that our time might be limited, that the conditions that allow for the emergence and maintenance of technological civilization might be temporary. The asteroid that ended the age of dinosaurs was not the first catastrophic event in Earth's history, and it won't be the last. Supervolcanic eruptions, gamma-ray bursts, massive climate changes, all of these represent potential threats to any civilization, no matter how advanced or well adapted. The key to long-term survival might not be building stronger defenses or more powerful technologies, but developing forms of intelligence that can adapt to radical change while preserving essential knowledge and capabilities. The dinosaur builders, if they existed, might have understood this. Their biological technologies might have been designed not just for efficiency and sustainability, but for adaptability and resilience. Their greatest achievement might have been creating forms of intelligence that could survive the death of their civilization, that could preserve essential knowledge through catastrophic change, that could adapt to new conditions while maintaining the core insights that made civilization possible in the first place. Their legacy might not be in the structures they built or the technologies they created, but in the principles they discovered and the pathways they opened for future intelligences to explore. If this is true, then the emergence of human consciousness and technology might not represent a new beginning, but a continuation of a much older story. We might be rediscovering principles first explored by dinosaur minds, following pathways first mapped by intelligences that faced and solved challenges we're only beginning to encounter. The evidence remains fragmentary and speculative, but the questions are profound. They force us to expand our understanding of what intelligence can achieve and how consciousness can persist through time. They challenge us to think beyond the limitations of human experience and imagine forms of awareness and creativity that might be completely alien, yet perfectly natural. Whether or not dinosaurs were actually builders, the possibility itself is transformative. It suggests that intelligence might be a fundamental property of complex systems, something that emerges naturally whenever conditions allow. It implies that consciousness and creativity are not human inventions, but cosmic phenomena, expressions of the universe's tendency toward greater complexity and self-awareness. And if that's true, then the story of intelligence on Earth is far from over. We might be witnessing not the culmination of consciousness, but one chapter in a much longer story. A story that began with the first thinking minds that ruled the world under ancient skies and continues with every question we ask about our place in the cosmos. The search for dinosaur builders continues, not just in the rocks and fossils of the distant past, but in the genomes of modern organisms, in the patterns of ancient ecosystems, and in the very nature of intelligence itself. Each discovery, each new insight into the complexity of prehistoric life brings us closer to understanding whether we really are alone in our capacity for consciousness and creativity, or whether we're part of a tradition that stretches back through deep time to the age of giants. The search becomes even more compelling when we consider the sophisticated social structures that some dinosaur species clearly possessed. Recent discoveries have revealed nesting colonies that spanned hundreds of square miles, with evidence of coordinated construction projects that would have required planning and communication on a massive scale. Maiasaura, the good mother lizard, built nests in carefully organized communities where thousands of individuals work together to create optimal conditions for raising their young. But these weren't random gatherings driven by instinct alone. The positioning of nests, the construction of earthwork barriers to protect against flooding, the creation of pathways between different sections of the colony, all of this suggests a level of planning and cooperation that goes far beyond what we see in most modern animals. The fossil evidence shows that these colonies persisted for thousands of years, with each generation building upon the work of the previous one, refining techniques and expanding the infrastructure. Now scale this up. If some dinosaur species could organize construction projects involving thousands of individuals working across vast areas for extended periods, what might they have achieved with millions of years to develop these capabilities? What if the organized colonies we find in the fossil record represent not the peak of dinosaur social organization, but merely its earliest stages. The mathematics of deep time becomes staggering when applied to social and technological development. Human civilization has gone from simple agriculture to space travel in roughly 10,000 years. The Industrial Revolution transformed our entire world in less than 300 years. The digital revolution has reshaped human society in mere decades. Yet dinosaurs had over 1,600 times longer than the entire span of human civilization to develop their own technologies and social structures. During that vast expanse of time, they weren't static creatures, mindlessly repeating the same behaviors, generation after generation. The fossil record shows continuous evolution, adaptation, and diversification. New species appeared, developed novel characteristics, and either thrived or went extinct based on their ability to adapt to changing conditions. This was evolution in action, but evolution guided by intelligence might look very different from evolution driven by random mutation and environmental pressure alone. Consider the rapid emergence of flight in dinosaurs. Within a relatively short geological time frame, some dinosaur lineages developed powered flight, one of the most complex and demanding forms of locomotion in the animal kingdom. The engineering challenges involved in transitioning from terrestrial to aerial life are enormous. It requires not just the evolution of wings, but the complete restructuring of skeletal systems, respiratory systems, nervous systems, and metabolic processes. Modern aircraft design takes teams of engineers years to perfect, even with our understanding of aerodynamics and access to advanced materials. Yet dinosaurs accomplished this transition naturally, developing flight capabilities that in some cases exceeded those of modern aircraft. Some pterosaurs achieved wingspans of over 30 feet while maintaining the structural integrity needed for controlled flight. Others developed the ability to soar across oceans, navigating by methods we still don't fully understand. What if this wasn't entirely natural? What if some dinosaur species had developed sufficient understanding of physics and engineering to guide their own evolutionary development? The techniques for such directed evolution might have been biological rather than mechanical, using selective breeding, environmental manipulation, and perhaps even primitive forms of genetic engineering based on principles we're only now beginning to discover. The evidence for such directed development would be subtle, embedded in the very patterns of dinosaur evolution itself. We might find it in the unusually rapid appearance of complex adaptations that would normally require millions of years of gradual change. We might detect it in the simultaneous development of complementary traits across multiple species, suggesting coordination rather than coincidence. We might recognize it in evolutionary innovations that seem almost too perfect, too well designed to be the result of random processes alone. Some paleontologists have noticed exactly these patterns. The evolution of dinosaur flight happened remarkably quickly, with complex flight capabilities appearing in multiple lineages within a relatively short time frame. The development of sophisticated social behaviors, elaborate display structures, and complex communication systems all show signs of rapid coordinated development that challenges conventional models of evolutionary change. But perhaps the most intriguing evidence comes from the dinosaurs themselves. Recent discoveries have revealed species with brain structures that suggest cognitive capabilities far more advanced than we previously imagined. Troodon, the most intelligent dinosaur we know of, had a brain-to-body ratio comparable to modern birds, but its brain was organized differently, with enlarged regions associated with complex problem-solving and social cognition. If Trudon represents the peak of dinosaur intelligence, then we're looking at creatures that might have been capable of abstract thinking, long-term planning, and sophisticated tool use. But what if Trudon wasn't the peak? What if it was just one example of dinosaur intelligence that happened to leave behind recognizable fossils? What if other species developed even more advanced cognitive capabilities, but used them in ways that left no trace in the fossil record? The possibility becomes more plausible when you consider the diversity of dinosaur environments and lifestyles. While many species lived in terrestrial ecosystems that we can study through fossil remains, others inhabited environments that rarely preserve fossils. Coastal wetlands, river deltas, and shallow marine environments were home to countless dinosaur species. But these are exactly the kinds of environments where fossilization is least likely to occur. If the most intelligent dinosaur species lived in these poorly preserved environments, if they developed technologies based on organic materials that don't fossilize well, if they built their civilizations in places that have since been subducted into the Earth's mantle or eroded away entirely, then we would have almost no direct evidence of their existence. Their legacy would survive only in the most indirect ways, in patterns and anomalies that we might not even recognize as artificial. This possibility forces us to reconsider what we mean by evidence and proof. In human archaeology, we rely on durable artifacts to tell us about past civilizations. Stone tools, pottery fragments, building foundations, these objects provide clear, unambiguous evidence of human intelligence and culture. But what if intelligence doesn't always express itself through durable artifacts? What if some forms of consciousness and creativity leave behind traces that are too subtle, too integrated with natural processes to be easily recognized? The answer might lie in expanding our definition of archaeological evidence. Instead of looking only for objects that were clearly made by intelligent beings, we might need to search for patterns that suggest intelligent intervention in natural processes. Instead of excavating ancient cities, we might need to analyze entire ecosystems for signs of management and modification. Instead of studying individual artifacts, we might need to examine the statistical properties of fossil assemblages for evidence of non-random organization. This kind of research is already beginning to yield intriguing results. Computer analysis of dinosaur bone bed formations has revealed patterns that don't match what we would expect from natural accumulation processes. Some fossil sites show evidence of sorting and arrangement that suggests deliberate burial practices. Others contain unusual concentrations of specific minerals that might have been intentionally introduced for preservation purposes. The chemical composition of certain dinosaur fossils also raises questions. Some specimens contain trace elements in proportions that don't match the geology of their burial sites, suggesting that these elements were introduced from external sources. The patterns of these chemical anomalies sometimes show spatial organization that hints at systematic treatment of remains, possibly for cultural or technological purposes. Even more intriguingly, some researchers have found evidence of what appear to be artificial modifications to dinosaur bones. Tool marks, deliberate shaping, and structural alterations that can't be explained by natural processes or predation. These modifications are rare and controversial, often dismissed as natural phenomena or misinterpretation of geological processes. But they occur consistently enough across different sites and time periods to raise serious questions about their origin. The implications of such evidence are staggering. If dinosaurs were modifying bones, if they were treating their dead with ritual care, if they were manipulating the mineral content of their burial sites, then we're looking at behaviors that go far beyond simple, at technology, at forms intelligence. We're looking at a culture of consciousness that we've never imagined in non-human species. But bone modification represents just one possible avenue for dinosaur technology. The real breakthrough might come from understanding how biological intelligence could manipulate living systems themselves. Modern genetic engineering gives us hints of what might be possible. We can already modify organisms to produce specific compounds, to exhibit particular behaviors, to serve specialized functions. What might be possible with millions of years to refine these techniques? Dinosaur biotechnology might have operated on principles we're only beginning to understand. Instead of building machines, they might have bred organisms. Instead of manufacturing materials, they might have evolved them. Instead of constructing buildings, they might have grown them from living systems that could adapt, repair themselves, and reproduce. The evidence for such biotechnology would be incredibly difficult to detect. Living buildings would decay after their inhabitants died. Biological machines would be indistinguishable from evolved organisms after millions of years. Even the most sophisticated organic technologies would eventually be absorbed back into natural ecosystems, leaving behind only subtle traces in the genetic code of their descendants. But those traces might still be detectable if we know how to look for them. Modern genomic analysis is revealing unexpected patterns in the DNA of many species, sequences that seem too complex or too organized to be the result of natural selection alone. Some of these patterns might represent the remnants of ancient genetic engineering, fragments of dinosaur biotechnology that have persisted through millions of years of evolution. The search for these genetic traces requires sophisticated computational tools and new approaches to understanding biological complexity. We need to look not just at individual genes, but at the relationships between different genetic systems, the patterns of organization that suggest purposeful design rather than random development. We need to analyze not just modern organisms, but the evolutionary pathways that led to their current forms, searching for discontinuities that might indicate artificial intervention. This kind of research is still in its infancy, but the preliminary results are tantalizing. There are genetic networks in modern organisms that seem almost engineered in their elegance and efficiency. There are biochemical pathways that appear to be optimized beyond what natural selection alone could achieve. There are regulatory systems that suggest a level of coordination and planning that challenges our understanding of how biological complexity emerges. None of this proves the existence of dinosaur biotechnology, but it suggests that the biological world might be more purposefully designed than we've assumed. It hints at the possibility that intelligence has been shaping living systems for far longer than we've imagined, working through biological rather than mechanical means to create technologies that are perfectly integrated with natural processes. If this is true, then the distinction between natural and artificial might be far more blurred than we've assumed. The organisms we consider wild might carry within their genetic code the legacy of ancient engineering projects. The ecosystems we think of as pristine might be the descendants of managed environments created by minds that understood biology in ways we're only beginning to appreciate. This perspective transforms our understanding of conservation and environmental management. If modern ecosystems contain elements of ancient biotechnology, if they represent the culmination of millions of years of intelligent design and natural evolution working together, then our responsibility as stewards of the natural world becomes even more profound. We're not just protecting wild species and natural processes. We might be preserving the greatest technological achievements in Earth's history. The story of potential dinosaur builders also raises fundamental questions about the nature of intelligence itself. We tend to think of consciousness as a uniquely human trait, something that emerged relatively recently in Earth's history. But what if intelligence is far more common and ancient than we've assumed? What if consciousness is a fundamental property of complex systems, something that emerges naturally whenever matter and energy organize themselves in sufficiently sophisticated ways? This possibility suggests that the universe itself might be far more aware and purposeful than we've imagined. Instead of being rare accidents in a mostly unconscious cosmos, intelligent beings might be natural expressions of cosmic evolution, inevitable results of the universe's tendency toward greater complexity and self-organization. We might not be alone in our capacity for consciousness and creativity. We might be part of a vast community of aware beings, most of whom we've never recognized because they think and build and create in ways completely foreign to human experience. The implications extend beyond Earth to questions about intelligence throughout the cosmos. If consciousness can emerge in forms as different as human minds and dinosaur builders, if intelligence can persist through catastrophic changes and express itself through biological technologies that leave no obvious traces, then the universe might be teeming with awareness in forms we've never considered. The search for extraterrestrial intelligence might need to expand beyond looking for radio signals and mechanical technologies. We might need to search for biological modifications to planetary ecosystems, for patterns of genetic organization that suggest purposeful design, for statistical anomalies in the distribution of life that hint at intelligent intervention. The intelligence we're looking for might not build metal cities or broadcast radio messages. It might reshape entire biospheres, encode information in genetic systems, and communicate through methods that operate on timescales completely foreign to human experience. But perhaps the most profound implication of the dinosaur builder hypothesis is what it suggests about our own future. If intelligence really has emerged multiple times in Earth's history, if consciousness can persist through catastrophic changes by adapting to new forms and new possibilities, then human civilization might not be as fragile as we fear. Our technologies and cultural achievements might be temporary, but the principles and insights that created them might survive in forms we can't yet imagine. The key to long-term survival might not be building stronger defenses or more durable monuments, but developing forms of intelligence that can adapt to radical change while preserving essential knowledge. We might need to learn from the possible example of dinosaur builders, creating technologies that work with natural processes rather than against them, encoding important information in biological systems that can evolve and adapt, building forms of consciousness that can persist through transformations that would destroy any mechanical civilization. The evidence for dinosaur intelligence remains suggestive rather than conclusive, scattered across disciplines and hidden in patterns that are only beginning to be recognized. But the questions it raises are crucial for understanding not just the past, but our own future as a conscious species in a universe that might be far more aware than we've ever dared to imagine. Whether or not dinosaurs were actually builders, the possibility itself changes how we think about intelligence, consciousness, and our place in the cosmic story. It suggests that we might not be the first thinking beings to emerge on this planet, and we probably won't be the last. We're part of a much longer tradition of awareness and creativity, inheritors of insights that might stretch back through deep time to minds that ruled the world when the continents were young and the future was an open question waiting to be explored. The search for evidence of dinosaur builders forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth about the nature of discovery itself. Science progresses not just through finding new evidence, but through learning to see existing evidence in new ways. The rocks have been there all along, waiting for minds capable of asking the right questions. The fossils have been telling their stories for over a century, but we've been listening with ears trained to hear only certain kinds of narratives. What if we've been walking past the evidence of dinosaur civilization for generations, dismissing it as natural curiosities, because it doesn't match our preconceptions about what intelligence looks like? What if the very assumptions that make us good at recognizing human artifacts make us blind to signs of non-human consciousness? Consider the strange case of the thunder eggs, geological formations found in certain rock layers from the late Cretaceous period. These spherical structures, some as large as bowling balls, contain intricate internal patterns that seem almost crystalline in their organization. Conventional geology explains them as concretions, natural formations created by mineral precipitation around organic nuclei. But some thunder eggs show internal structures so complex, so geometrically precise, that they challenge our understanding of what purely natural processes can create. Inside these formations, researchers have found chambers arranged in patterns that seem almost architectural. Mineral deposits form spirals, lattices, and branching networks that look remarkably similar to the internal structures of complex organisms. Some contain what appear to be channels and passages that could have facilitated fluid flow or transportation of materials. Others show evidence of multiple construction phases, as if they were built up over time through deliberate additions and modifications. Most geologists regard these features as fascinating examples of self-organization in mineral systems, proof that nature can create remarkable complexity without intelligent intervention. And they're probably right. But what if some of these formations aren't entirely natural? What if they represent a form of construction that use geological processes as building tools, guiding and directing natural mineral formation to create structures that serve specific purposes? The techniques for such geological engineering might not have been as alien as they first appear. Even today, we're learning that many organisms can influence mineral formation, directing the growth of crystals and controlling the deposition of materials through biological processes. Mollusks create shells with internal structures more complex than most human engineering. Corals build massive reefs by manipulating the chemistry of seawater. Some bacteria can even precipitate metals from solution, creating mineral deposits in patterns that reflect their biological organization. If dinosaur builders understood these processes, if they learned to harness and direct the natural tendency of minerals to self-organize, they might have developed a form of construction that worked with geological forces rather than against them. Their buildings might have grown from the ground up, shaped by biological catalysts and chemical gradients that guided mineral formation into predetermined patterns. Such construction would explain many of the anomalies wed in thin Mesozoic rock formations. Mineral veins that seem too organized, too purposeful in their distribution. Cave systems that show evidence of modification and expansion beyond what water erosion alone could account for. Underground chambers that appear to have been deliberately shaped and reinforced, then sealed and hidden by later geological activity. The evidence is subtle, often requiring sophisticated analysis to distinguish it from natural processes, but it remains consistent across different sites and geological contexts, suggesting that whatever created these formations was both widespread and systematic in its approach. More importantly, the patterns show signs of refinement and development over time, as if the techniques were being perfected through experimentation and accumulated knowledge. This progression hints at something that goes beyond simple tool use or environmental modification. It suggests a form of technology that developed over millions of years, becoming increasingly sophisticated as each generation built upon the discoveries of the previous one. The early formations are crude, barely distinguishable from natural processes. The later ones show evidence of precision and control that approaches the level of engineering. But geological construction represents just one possible avenue for dinosaur technology. The real breakthrough in understanding their civilization might come from recognizing that their greatest achievements weren't built at all. They were grown. Modern synthetic biology is teaching us that the most sophisticated technologies might be biological rather than mechanical. We're learning to engineer bacteria that can produce pharmaceuticals, to create algae that generate biofuels, to design organisms that can clean up environmental contamination. We're discovering that living systems can be programmed and directed to serve technological purposes while remaining fully integrated with natural ecosystems. If human scientists can achieve these results with just a few decades of research, what might dinosaur builders have accomplished with millions of years to perfect their techniques? What if they developed forms of biotechnology so advanced, so seamlessly integrated with natural processes, that we can't distinguish their creations from wild organisms? The evidence for such biotechnology might be hiding in the genomes of modern species, encoded in DNA sequences that seem too complex or too organized to be the result of natural selection alone. Recent advances in computational genomics are revealing patterns in genetic data that challenge our understanding of how biological complexity emerges. Some genetic networks show signs of optimization that exceed what evolutionary algorithms can achieve through random mutation and selection. Others contain information structures that seem almost like programming code, with modular organization and error correction systems that suggest purposeful design. These patterns might represent the remnants of ancient genetic engineering, fragments of dinosaur biotechnology that have persisted through millions of years of evolution. The techniques they used might have been based on principles we're only now beginning to discover, methods for directing evolutionary change that worked with natural processes rather than against them. Instead of forcing genetic modifications through artificial means, dinosaur builders might have learned to guide evolution through environmental manipulation and selective pressures. They could have created specialized ecosystems that encourage specific genetic changes, breeding populations that developed desired traits through accelerated natural selection. Over thousands of generations, they might have been able to engineer organisms that serve technological purposes while remaining fully biological in their operation. Such organisms would be indistinguishable from natural species after millions of years of subsequent evolution. Their artificial origins would be hidden beneath layers of adaptive changes that occurred after their creators disappeared. But traces of their original design might still be detectable in their genetic architecture, in patterns of organization that suggest purposeful construction rather than random development. The search requires new approaches to understanding biological complexity. We need to examine the evolutionary pathways that led to our current genetic structures, as well as the regulatory networks that control how genetic information is expressed. Rather than focusing on individual genes, We must analyze the statistical properties of genetic variation and the higher order arrangements we would expect from natural evolution, searching for discontinuities, unexpected complexity, and unusual efficiency within the genome. Genetic modules or regulatory networks that appear almost engineered in their precision may indicate artificial intervention. In short, we must look for patterns that deviate from what natural processes alone would produce, evidence of modular design and recombination guided by intelligence rather than chance. This kind of research is revealing biological storage systems that encode multiple layers of meaning within the same DNA sequences, using redundancy and error correction mechanisms that surpass what natural selection alone could produce. None of this proves the existence of dinosaur biotechnology, but it suggests that the biological world might contain more purposeful design than we've assumed. It hints at the possibility that intelligence has been shaping living systems for far longer than we've imagined, using techniques that leave traces in the very structure of genetic information. The implications extend beyond questions about ancient civilizations to fundamental issues about the nature of life itself. If biological systems can be purposefully designed and engineered, if genetic information can be structured and organized according to technological principles, then the boundary between natural and artificial becomes much more fluid than we've assumed. This fluidity might be the key to understanding why we find so little direct evidence of dinosaur civilization. If their technology was fundamentally biological, if their greatest achievements were living systems that evolved and adapted over time, then their legacy might be all around us, hidden in the very fabric of modern ecosystems. The forests we walk through might contain trees whose growth patterns were originally designed by dinosaur agricultural engineers. The insects we observe might carry genetic programs that were first written by minds that understood biological computation millions of years before we discovered DNA. The microbial communities that maintain soil fertility might be descended from biological machines that were created to support dinosaur civilization and continue to function long after their builders disappeared. This vision of pervasive biological technology transforms our understanding of conservation and environmental protection. We're not just preserving wild species and natural processes. We might be maintaining technological systems that represent the culmination of millions of years of biological engineering, living monuments to forms of intelligence that worked with life rather than against it. But it also raises profound questions about our own technological development. If biological systems can achieve levels of sophistication that rival or exceed mechanical technologies, if living organisms can be programmed and directed to serve complex purposes, then human civilization might be following the wrong path entirely. Our mechanical technologies, for all their power and precision, are fundamentally limited by the materials and energy sources available to us. They require constant maintenance, consume finite resources, and produce waste products that accumulate in the environment. They're based on principles of domination and control, forcing natural systems to serve human purposes, regardless of the ecological consequences. Biological technologies, by contrast, are self-maintaining, energy-efficient, and fully integrated with natural cycles. They improve with time rather than degrading. They enhance rather than degrade the environments they operate in. They're based on principles of cooperation and symbiosis, working with natural processes to achieve technological goals. If dinosaur builders really did develop such biological technologies, if they learned to create living systems that could serve technological purposes while remaining fully natural in their operation, then they might have achieved something that continues to elude human civilization: true sustainability. the ability to create advanced technological societies that enhance rather than degrade the planetary systems they depend on. The techniques they developed might still be recoverable, encoded in the genetic information of their biological creations. The principles they discovered might be applicable to human technology, offering pathways toward forms of development that could persist for millions of years without causing environmental collapse. But recovering this ancient knowledge would require a fundamental shift in how we think about technology and intelligence. We would need to move beyond mechanical metaphors and embrace biological approaches to problem solving. We would need to learn to work with living systems rather than trying to replace them with artificial alternatives. Most importantly, we would need to develop the patience and long-term thinking that biological engineering requires. Mechanical technologies can be built quickly, assembled from pre-existing components in a matter of days or months. Biological technologies require time to grow and develop, generations to refine and perfect. They demand a perspective that spans centuries or millennia rather than quarterly reports or election cycles. If dinosaur builders really did exist, this might have been their greatest achievement, not any specific technology or structure, but the development of long-term thinking, the ability to plan and work toward goals that would only be achieved by future generations, the patience to invest millions of years in projects that would benefit descendants they would never meet. This kind of temporal perspective might be essential for any civilization that hopes to survive on cosmic timescales. The challenges that face intelligent species, climate change, resource depletion, asteroid impacts, stellar evolution, all operate on timescales that exceed individual lifespans or even the duration of entire civilizations. Surviving these challenges requires forms of intelligence that can think and plan across geological time, technologies that can adapt and evolve over millions of years. The evidence for dinosaur builders remains fragmentary and speculative, scattered across multiple disciplines and hidden in patterns that are only beginning to be recognized. But the possibility itself is transformative, forcing us to expand our understanding of what intelligence can achieve and how consciousness can persist through time. Whether or not dinosaurs actually developed technological civilizations, the questions their story raises are crucial for understanding our own future as a conscious species in a universe that might be far more aware than we've ever dared to imagine. They challenge us to think beyond the limitations of human experience and consider forms of intelligence that might be completely alien, yet perfectly natural. The search continues, not just in the rocks and fossils of the distant past, but in the genomes of modern organisms, in the patterns of ancient ecosystems, and in the very nature of consciousness itself. Each discovery brings us closer to understanding whether we really are alone in our capacity for awareness and creativity, or whether we're part of a tradition that stretches back through deep time to minds that ruled the world when the earth was young and the future was infinite with possibility. The evidence may be scattered across millions of years and hidden beneath layers of geological change, but the questions we've explored today refuse to disappear. The possibility that dinosaurs were intelligent builders forces us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about consciousness, civilization, and our place in the cosmic timeline. Think about what we've discovered. For 165 million years, creatures with sophisticated brains ruled every continent on Earth. They developed complex social structures, engaged in behaviors that suggest long-term planning, and may have manipulated their environments in ways we're only beginning to recognize. The traces they left behind, subtle chemical signatures, unusual geological formations, patterns in the fossil record that don't quite fit our models of natural processes, all point toward possibilities we've barely begun to explore. But perhaps the most profound implication isn't about the past at all. It's about what their story teaches us about intelligence itself. If consciousness can emerge in forms as different as human minds and dinosaur builders, if awareness can persist through catastrophic changes and express itself through technologies that leave no obvious traces, then the universe might be far more conscious than we've ever imagined. We're not the first intelligent species to emerge on this planet, and we probably won't be the last. We're part of something much larger, inheritors of a tradition of consciousness that may stretch back through deep time, to minds that thought in ways we can barely comprehend. Their greatest achievement might not have been any specific technology or structure, but the development of sustainable forms of intelligence that could work with natural processes rather than against them. The search for dinosaur builders continues, hidden in genetic codes, geological anomalies, and patterns we haven't learned to recognize yet. Whether we find conclusive proof or not, the possibility itself changes everything. It reminds us that intelligence is not a human invention, but a natural phenomenon, that consciousness might be as fundamental to the universe as gravity or electromagnetism. And if that's true, then our responsibility becomes even greater. We're not just building a civilization. We're continuing a story that began millions of years ago and might continue long after we're gone. The question isn't whether we're alone, but whether we're wise enough to learn from those who came before us and build something that could last not just for generations, but for geological ages.